a technology quarterly on personalized medicine.
A technology quarterly on personalized medicine.
The sum of all lives.
The sum of all lives.
The coming of the datum.
The coming of the datum.
The way people live their lives can be mined too.
The way people live their lives can be mined too.
Threadworms are trending, according to the app on Johannes Schultz's phone.
Threadworms are trending according to the app on Mr. Johannes Schultz's phone. According to the app on on Johannes Schultz's phone.
The app was created by Cry, the Swedish digital healthcare firm Mr. Schultz runs.
The app was created by Cry, the Swedish digital healthcare firm Mr. Schultz runs.
It offers information on the sicknesses for which people are currently booking doctor's appointments, as well as on things specifically important to its user. It keeps Mr. Schultz, who suffers from hay fever, up to date with the pollen count.
It offers information on the sicknesses for which people are currently booking doctor's appointments, as well as on things specifically useful to its user. It keeps Mr. Schultz, who suffers from the hay fever, up to date with the pollen count.
It lets him book an appointment with a family doctor or a specialist, and indeed to have such an appointment by phone.
It lets him have a doctor's appointment. It lets him have an appointment with a family doctor or a specialist. Indeed, have such an appointment by phone.
None of this sounds particularly stretching, but
None of this sounds particularly stretching.
in healthcare it counts as radical.
But in healthcare, it counts as radical.
According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, a club of richer nations, the world creates 2.5 exabytes of data a day. Thousands of times what even the grandest sequencing center can produce in a month.
According to the Organization for Economic Development, Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, a club of richer countries, the world creates 2.5 exabytes of data per day, thousands of times what even the grandest sequencing center can produce in a month.
Of those which get stored, 30% pertain to health.
Of those which get stored, 30% pertain to health.
The trove contains insights into the health of populations and of individuals, the efficacy of drugs and the efficiency of healthcare systems, the failings of doctors, and the financial health of insurers.
The trove contains insights into the health of the population and of individuals, the efficacy of drugs and the efficiency of healthcare systems, the failings of doctors, and the financial health of insurers.
But OECD countries typically spend less than 5% of their health budgets managing these data, much less than is the norm in other areas.
But OECD countries typically spend less than 5% of their budgets managing this data, much less than is the norm in other areas.
By failing to make the most of their potential, these countries are wasting $600 billion a year, roughly the GDP of Sweden.
By failing to make the most of their potential, these countries are wasting $600 billion a year, roughly the GDP of Sweden.
This underutilized resource has attracted the attention of a panoply of private companies, from minnows like Cry to giants like Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google.
This underutilized resource has attracted the attention of a panoply of private companies, from minnows like Cry to giants like Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google.
Governments, hospitals, and insurers, they think, will pay for what they glean from it.
Governments, hospitals, and insurers, they think, will pay for what they glean from it.
So will individuals, who will often pay for the privilege of supplying yet more data off their own bat.
So will individuals who will often pay for the privilege of provide supplying yen more data of their own bet.
Mobile phones log their users' physical activity, creating records used by many of the billions of health-related smartphone apps downloaded globally every year. 1.7 billion in 2013, 3.7 billion in 2017.
Mobile phones log their users' physical activity, creating records used by the billions of smartphone apps downloaded globally every year. Yeah. 1.7 in 2013 and 3.7 billion in 2017.
Make sense of all this data for them, the argument goes, and you can make money helping people stay healthy and warning them of disease.
Make sense of all this data for them, the argument goes, and you can make money helping people stay healthy and warning them of disease.
As with the genome 20 years ago, some skepticism is warranted.
As with the genome 20 years ago, some skepticism is warranted.
But in time, a picture of a life built up from the genome's underlying recipe, from medical histories and tests that profile specific bodily functions, and from the monitoring of every step and heartbeat, will allow personalized preventive medicine to be rolled out across entire populations.
But in time, a picture of a life built up from the genome's underlying recipe, from medical tests and diagnosis that profile bodily functions, and from the monitoring of every step and heartbeat, will allow personalized preventive medicine to be rolled out across the population.
All these layers define the medical essence of a human being.
All these layers define the medical essence of a human being,
says Eric Topol, head of the Scripps Research Translational Institute in La Jolla, California. Adding real-world data to genome-based profiles would undoubtedly be useful.
Adding real-world data to genome-based profiles would undoubtedly be useful.
Michael Joyner of the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and Nigel Paneth at Michigan State University argue that characteristics such as family history, neighborhood, socioeconomic circumstances, height, and girth still outperform genetic profiling as predictors for all sorts of health outcomes.
They argue that characteristics such as family history, neighbors, socioeconomic circumstances, height, and girth still outperform genetic profiling as predictors for all sorts of health outcomes.
This does not mean genetic information is without value.
This does not mean genetic information is without value.
It means it needs context.
It means in this context.
Various new frontiers in diagnosis are being explored.
Various new frontiers in diagnosis are being explored.
Firms across the world are competing to develop liquid biopsies that can detect and characterize cancers by means of fragments of DNA in the blood.
Various firms across the world are competing to develop liquid biopsies that can detect and characterize cancer by means of fragments of DNA in the blood.
Other molecular markers could DNA in the blood. Other molecular markers could reveal other diseases.
Other molecular markers could reveal other diseases.
But so could the digital footprints people leave when they decide whether to leave the house, what to buy, what to search for, or what to stream.
So could the digital footprints people leave when they decide whether to leave the house, what to buy, what to search for, or what to stream.
Sometimes the footprints may be just that.
Sometimes the footprints may be just that.
Dan Vardat, who runs Medopad, a health technology firm in London, says conditions as varied as Parkinson's disease, depression, and breast cancer can all have a distinctive effect on a patient's gait.
He says conditions as varied as Parkinson's disease, depression, and breast cancer can all have a distinctive effect on a patient's gait.
He speculates that with enough data, gait, He speculates that with enough data covering different behaviors, it will be possible to identify digital biomarkers capable of predicting the risk of Alzheimer's or a heart attack.
He speculates that with enough data covering different behaviors, it is possible to identify digital biomarkers capable of predicting the risk of Alzheimer's or heart attack.
Work by Dr. Topol has already shown that spikes in resting heart rate, more common when people have an infection, allows someone with access to lots of Fitbits to see when flu is breaking out in the population.
Work by Dr. Topol has already shown that spikes in resting heart rate, more common when people have an infection, will allow someone with access to lots of Fitbits to see when the flu is breaking out in the population.
The recognition of such patterns is clearly a job for the machine learning techniques driving the current expansion of AI.
The recognition of such patterns is definitely a job for machine learning techniques driving the expansion of AI.
These techniques are already being used to interpret diagnostic tests, sometimes with real success.
These technologies are already being used to interpret diagnostic tests, sometimes with real success.
An AI system for prostate cancer diagnosis, developed by the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, has held its own against a panel of 23 international experts.
Diagnostic tests for the prostate cancer diagnosis has held its own against a panel of 23 international experts.
A 9-country trial is now assessing how much it can reduce the workload of doctors.
A 9-country trial is now assessing how much it can reduce the workload of doctors.
But recent research published in The Lancet Digital Health, a journal, suggests some caution is advisable.
But recent research published by a journal, suggests some caution is advisable.
Looking at around 20,000 studies of medical AI systems that claimed to show that they could diagnose things as well as healthcare professionals, it found that most had methodological flaws.
Looking at around 20,000 medical tests done by AI system AI system that claim to show that what is that? Looking at around 20,000 studies of medical AI systems that claim to show that they could diagnose things as well as healthcare professionals, it showed that most showed the methodological flaws. Most had methodological flaws.
One particular worry with machine learning in general is that bias in the training sets from which the computers learn their stuff can mean that the algorithms do not work equally well for all members of the population.
One particular worry with the machine learning in general is that bias in the training sets from which computers learn their stuff could mean that the algorithms do not work equally well for all members of the population.
Medical research has a poor historical record on such matters. For example, when it does not match clinical trial populations to the population at large, or excludes women of childbearing age from trials.
Medical research has poor historical record on such matters. For example, when it does not match clinical trial populations to to the population at large or excludes women of childbearing age from trials.
Machine learning could bake in such biases and make them invisible.
Machine learning could bake in such biases and make them invisible.
Excessive optimism that edges into barefaced hype is just one cause for concern about datomics.
Excessive optimism that edges into barefaced hype is just one cause for concern about datomics.
Privacy is, as always, an issue.
Privacy is, as always, an issue.
The amount of data that parts of the NHS have shared with Google has worried some Britons.
The amount of data parts of NHS have shared with Google has worried some Britons.
Conversely, some researchers feel hampered by constraints such as those of Europe's General Data Protection Regulation, says Claire Guérel of the EU's Data Protection Authority.
Conversely, some researchers feel hampered by constraints like those of Europe's Data Protection Regulation, says blah blah blah, of the EU's Data Protection Authority.
They see it as an obstacle to innovation.
They see it as an obstacle to innovation.
Ms. Guérel treats that with equanimity.
Ms. Guérel treats that with equanimity.
I don't think it is a bad thing to think slower, especially in health.
I don't think it's a bad thing to think slower, especially in health.
As well as worries over what researchers or companies might do with personal data, there are reasonable concerns over how safe they can keep it.
As well as worries about what researchers and companies might do with personal data, there are reasonable concerns over how safe they can keep it.
A cyber attack on Premera Blue Cross, an American insurer, may have exposed the medical data of 11 million customers in 2015.
Cyber attack on the company may have exposed the medical data of 11 million patients in 2015.
There is also the challenge of cost.
There's also the challenge of cost.
Whatever claims are made early on, and whatever benefits they may demonstrate, new technologies have a marked, persistent tendency to drive up spending on health in rich countries.
Whatever claims are made early on, and whatever benefits they may demonstrate. What? Healthcare? What? New technologies have a marked persistent tendency to drive up spending on healthcare in rich countries.
There is no obvious reason to think that just because sequencing, data processing, and some forms of machine learning are getting cheaper, their ever greater application to healthcare will drive down costs.
There is no obvious reason to think that just because sequence data processing and some forms of machine learning are getting cheaper, their ever greater application to healthcare will drive down costs.
One reason is that although knowledge may be power, it may also be a needless worry.
One reason is that although knowledge may be power, it may also be a needless worry.
A DNA test that seems to tell you some of your future, or a watch that can pick up atrial fibrillation, may seem great to users. They are less enticing to health systems that have to deal with diagnoses which are not, in themselves, clinically relevant.
DNA test that might tell some of your future, and a digital watch that can pick up atrial fibrillation. What? May seem useful to users, but not enticing to health system. But they are less enticing to health system that have to deal with diagnoses that are in themselves not clinically relevant.
Last year, the New York Times reported that a period tracking app, which also evaluated women's risk of polycystic ovary syndrome, a hormonal problem, was recommending that an improbably large number of its users see their doctors.
Last year, the New York Times reported that period tracking app, which also evaluates a hormonal symptom, was recommending a improbably large number of its users see their doctors.
Trustable intermediaries, such as government healthcare systems, regulators, and reputable insurers, will help consumers to know what works best.
Trustable intermediaries such as governments, healthcare systems, regulators, or reputable insurers can help consumers to know what works best.
They should also be able to help each other.
They should also be able to help each other.
Not everyone is motivated to improve their health, and even avid consumers of health data will rarely have the same sense of common cause as people with congenital diseases and their families.
Most people, not everyone is motivated to improve their health, and even avid consumer of health data will rarely have the same sense of common cause as people with a congenital disease and their families.
But health concerns bring people together,
But health concerns bring people together,
and through supporting each other, they may develop new mechanisms for change.
and through supporting each other, they may develop new mechanisms for change.
Because health systems look to the needs of the many, personalized medicine will hit its stride only when it can show that its approaches work in the round.
Because health systems look to the needs of the many, personalized medicine can hit its stride only when it can show that its approaches work in the round.
But as people get more used to customizing their lives through online services that know what they want, healthcare will get pulled along.
But as people get more used to personalizing their lives through online services that know what they want, healthcare system may be pulled along. We'll get pulled along.
There will be many false correlations, privacy violations, and errors along the way.
There will be many false correlation, previous violations, and errors along the way.
But in the end, people of all sorts will benefit from being understood.
But in the end, people of all sorts will benefit from being understood as unique.